Welcome to the HRKyle Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on leadership, job searching, and all things human resources. I'm your host, HRKyle, and each week we dive deep into topics relevant to professionals seeking to elevate their careers and organizations. Whether you're a seasoned leader, a job seeker navigating the ever-changing landscape of employment, or an enthusiast looking to stay ahead of the curve, this is the podcast for you. Join me as we explore practical strategies, share expert insights, and engage in meaningful conversations that empower you to succeed in today's dynamic workplace. So, adjust your headphones and let's dive in. Hello and welcome to another edition of the HRKyle Podcast. I'm your usual host, HRKyle, and again, welcome to the show. We always appreciate you tuning in. We'll be following pretty much the same format that we have over the last 55 plus episodes, but be aware that as we round out our interviews that we've saved up over the past few months, we're going to be transitioning to a new format. And that's probably going to be within the next 3 to 4 weeks, maybe a little bit longer. And part of that new format will be a video format where you're actually going to get to see us. And we're hoping that increases rather than decreases our listenership. I'm counting on it increasing, at least with Becki joining me. But that's more to come on that. But I wanted to give you a little heads up. So let's get into today's theme of this episode, which is the power of a positive first impression. And it's not something that, again, I think gets a lot of attention in the business world, but you'd be amazed at how important it is, whether we're talking about interviews, assuming leadership positions, entering a room for a presentation or discussion. It can really have a profound effect on your effectiveness in those situations. So that's why we wanted to devote an episode to talk about this. And following our usual format, and in segment 1, Becki and I will discuss the topic. We'll share our experiences around this and some of the things that we've learned along the way. And then in segment 2, I'm going to have a gentleman who is an expert on this topic. He has spoken at numerous venues around the world. He's written a couple of books around the topic as well. He fully admits to being a lifelong salesperson, and as we all know, one of the critical elements to being an effective salesperson is that first impression. So he has quite a bit of knowledge, expertise, and a lot of good information to share around that. So his name is Glenn, and Glenn will be joining us in segment 2. But for segment 1, it's going to be Becki and I. And we're going to dive into this topic and have some fun around the topic as we usually do. But before we get to that, we do need to get to a quick break, let you know about some of the things we're up to at HRKyle. And when we come back, it's Becki and I.
Are you stuck in a job you hate? Dreaming of a career that excites you? It's time to turn those dreams into reality with Get the Job You Love by Kyle Patrick Smith, also known as HRKyle. Discover proven strategies to land your dream job, master interviews, and stand out from the crowd. Packed with expert advice and practical tips, Get the Job You Love is your ultimate guide to career success. Available now on Amazon and other online retailers. Don't wait. Start your journey to a fulfilling career today. Get the job you love, because you deserve a job you love.
And we're back. Segment 1 here to talk about the power of positive first impressions. And as always, I want to welcome Becki to the HRKyle Podcast studio.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks for having me here as usual.
Absolutely. Great to have you. Looking forward to this conversation today. Becki, as we always do, you're in charge at this point, and I'm simply your guest and your co-host to talk about this. So I'll turn the reins over to you.
Fantastic. So we're going to start off, as you said initially, we're going to talk about first impressions and setting the tone. So how can those initial interactions create lasting perceptions and impact opportunities such as interviews, networking, leadership?
Well, let's talk about interviews first and foremost. Candidates would be amazed, and there's a lot of data behind this, at how much weight is put into the final decision on an interview success or failure, again, from a hiring standpoint, based upon that initial interaction and that initial greeting that they have with the hiring manager. It's extraordinary. I've read some figures, and again, it can vary, but I think it gives some credence to what I'm saying. I've heard it said that 50 to 75% of a decision relative to proceeding with a candidate is made within the first couple of minutes.
Wow.
So that tells you that initial greeting, that initial impact that candidate makes can have a very profound effect on their success in the interview. And I think for all of us too, when we think about some of the meetings that we've had, or if we've attended a webinar or some sort of presentation in person, don't we really get a strong impression of who that speaker or who that person is by the first way they start talking, the way they introduce themselves, the way they stand up, the way they greet the crowd, the way they look in a lot of cases. We make a lot of interpretations and impressions based upon that. And again, that's the initial presentation. And that person may be speaking for 30 minutes to an hour, but we're allowing that initial to really influence how we accept them going forward. And I think we see that a lot. And Becki, I'd be curious your thoughts on that too, because you come at it from a little different perspective than I do.
Right. Well, first of all, it makes me think of how to dress. So even if you're not super comfortable with dressing up, and even if the job's going to be a t-shirt and jeans, wear a nice shirt and a nicer pair of jeans. Ladies, you don't have to wear a dress, but maybe, possibly white shirt, white blouse, black pants always takes care of that situation. So in my job, I work in manufacturing, and that's what I tell my folks when they go for interviews. You're going to be working in a hoodie and jeans, but don't go to the interview that way. So that first impression. And then part of my job is to take tours. And we've talked about this before. I want to see what that first impression is when I'm out on that floor. And when I see that everybody's saying hi to the HR person, the HR person's calling them by their first names, asking them about things, I'm impressed. That's where I want my folks to work.
Well, Becki, you bring up a couple of really great points that let's talk a little bit further about. For one, when you talk about dress, here's something, and again, I've done thousands of interviews as part of corporate HR. One thing that's never been said, we're not going to hire that candidate because they overdressed.
Right.
That's never been said in the history of interviewing, at least with me. Now, have I had hiring managers and so on say, I'm not going to hire that person because they underdress or they didn't dress well? Absolutely, I have, especially for positions that are customer facing or community facing. How that person presents themselves from a dress standpoint is absolutely a factor in the decision. The other thing that you bring up too, and I'm glad you hit on this, we always talk about in interviewing the impression that the candidate gives, but let's flip that around. And again, you and I talk about this a lot, and I know I publish a lot on this too when I talk to my candidates, is think about the impression the company's giving you. And you hit on that exactly. Yep. Imagine you're a candidate and they offer you a tour of the building and no one's friendly. It looks disorganized. It looks dirty. There's just not good interactions. People just seem like they're just kind of walking around with their heads down. It doesn't give off a good vibe. Guess what? That's your working conditions.
Yep. Exactly.
That's the impression.
Yeah. And that's what I look for when I'm placing my candidates into places. Definitely. Well, let's move into, this is an interesting topic, the science of positive impressions. So you believe there's a science behind it, the psychology. Can you talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of data that supports, and I alluded to it with the first question, but there's a lot of data that supports the power of the first impression from an interview standpoint and how much that influences how we interact in an interview setting and how people view how well the interview went. There's also data too, and it's interesting, that tells us that, how much we talk at the initial, how firm our handshake is. All of these things factor in. The other thing that again, when we talk about data, the majority of the information that we're gathering in that first impression is not verbal. The
Right.
vast majority of it, and it's somewhere about 75 to 85%, again, depending on what study you look at, is considering nonverbal. So think about what that is. That's how you dress. That's your stance. That's the eye contact. That's the look on your face. If you look friendly, that's reaching out and shaking the hand. How you're standing there. Are you standing chest out and straight up? Do you have your arms crossed, hands in your pockets? All of those different things. We, as a first impression, that's what we're reading. We're not as much listening to the words. And to make this really hit home, think about how often you meet someone and darn if you don't forget their name.
Right.
Because you're thinking so much and you're focusing, and it's subconscious, so much on the nonverbals of that initial interaction that you're not putting as much energy behind the verbals, and the verbal being the person's name and so on. And again, that's why I also tell my candidates, always get business cards. When you meet someone, give them your business card. And when you're in that meeting, take their business card for that reason, because it's the cheat code. If
Yes.
you don't mind, because we do as humans focus so much on the nonverbal. And again, we could get into the science behind that I'm sure goes back to the beginning of mankind, where there wasn't as much verbal involved in interactions, and I'm sure that's the root of it. In fact, we know it is, to where we're really focused on the nonverbals because that's what we're reading. And plus, there's just so much more information there from a nonverbal standpoint.
Right. And you talked about with the business cards, most of us when we interview, we don't interview with just one person. There might be 5 people. So that's a great idea to get those business cards, because when you send your thank you, you can send it to all of the people that we're in. And even possibly taking notes about, I know this is kind of getting off topic just a little bit, but taking notes on what the people say, what you laughed about, so that you can reference that when you send the email.
Well, Becki, though, that does hit around this topic, because when you're going in for an interview, that's a business meeting. And the message that I take from someone that comes in and they've got something to take notes with, and they're approaching it from a business standpoint, that's all part of that first impression.
Right.
So you're exactly right. That sends a message to that person to say, hey, you know what? This means something to them. This is important to them. And I would expect a person, I don't care what meeting it is, if you and I are sitting down for 30 minutes to an hour, I would expect you to take notes. I don't care what the topic is, whether it's an interview or whatever we're talking about, because I know I'm not going to remember everything we talked about.
Right. Well, and especially in that interview process, which we have talked about, is that you go in there and you're totally nervous. You totally forget all of the questions that you needed to ask and wanted to ask. And we talk about telling stories when we're in an interview, and jot those down. So when they ask you what your strength is, you have it written down on a piece of paper and you can tell a story about it.
Exactly. And again, that's all part of that positive first impression, because the alternative is you're sitting in that interview setting and you're stumbling over your words, or you're like, oh, I know there's something I want to share here, but it's not coming to me, versus there's a question and there's a healthy dialogue back and forth. And again, any reasonable interviewer gets it that's a nerve-wracking situation. We as interviewers try our very best to put you at ease, but ultimately we know that it's nervous. Because why? Because it's important. Anything that's very important to us, we get nervous about. So again, that's all part of making that positive impression. We call it a positive first impression, but there's no link to a first impression. If I've met you for the first time and we interact for 20 minutes, that all represents my first impression of you.
Right. Well, let's talk about authenticity versus perfection. How do you see that with those first impressions?
Well, again, hitting back on what I said before, I think part of the authenticity is realizing you probably should have a few things written down. You should have questions written down. That I see as authentic, because it's you being human enough to say, I'm not going to remember this, because I know I wouldn't. When I go into an interview, and thank God I'm not doing any on that side of the house anymore, but when I would, I had things written down, because again, I'm human, I forget things. And I think that does demonstrate a certain level of authenticity, even to say to the person, sometimes I write things down. That helps me remember.
Right.
And that demonstrates that, yeah, I'm just a real person. Sometimes I forget things. Sometimes it happens. But,
Yep.
Here's what I use to help me make up for that.
And I want to add on to that because I hear a lot with my candidates, and you probably hear this as well, speaking with clients, what questions should I ask? And I was just met with a young man the other day, and I told him to use ChatGPT. Simply type in or ask, what are 10 questions to ask on the first interview?
Yeah, I think that's a good helper. I think because we go into those situations and we're not quite sure. Here's what I would recommend, though. I like your idea, but I always tell clients and candidates, what's important to you? What do you really want to know? There's got to be questions. This is a place you've never been with people that you probably don't know. And putting yourself in the position of, okay, I want to make a wise decision around working there. That should guide your questions. And again, to your point, maybe they're struggling with that a little bit. So they do chat GPT. Then they get that list of 10 questions and they can look at it and say, oh, well, no, that's not important to me. Wait, that one's not. And they can make a reasonable list of, say, 4 or 5 questions that they want to make sure are covered during the interview. So again, that does lend to a positive impression because, quite honestly, the candidate that doesn't ask questions in interview, that doesn't leave a good first impression with me. It just doesn't. Because I don't care what position it is, and I'll fully admit, there's no way in this world I've shared enough information with you through the job posting and our conversations for you to make an informed decision about working for my company or the company I'm representing. There's no way. There has to be things that I haven't covered that you want to know about. And that tells me you're interested in the job and you're interested in doing your best. The person that doesn't have questions, I interpret that to mean they're just hoping to get a job and they don't care where it is and they don't, and their success does not matter. They just need a job.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree with that.
And you know what the people that fall into that category are called?
Unemployed?
Well, not unemployed. They get jobs, but they're job hoppers.
Oh, right.
Because the question that they should have asked during the interview, they don't find out, they're not asking, so they find out the answer after they're already working there, and many times they don't like the answer at that point.
Yeah, true.
So yeah, unemployed is a different answer. But yeah, they fall into that category too, because if they're not asking questions in the interview, they're probably not going to get the job.
Right. And just kind of sitting there listening to them instead of, and again, as we say, the interview should go both ways. It should be you 100%. Interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you.
And again, getting back to our topic at hand, that's how you make a positive impression. Right. Because we as humans, we expect dialogue. We expect there to be a give and take with conversations. We're raised around that. That's our standard. So when you're talking about making those positive impressions, where you're in conversations that feel very one-sided, that does not leave you with a positive first impression.
Well, let's finish up then talking about sustaining these positive impressions. So how do we ensure that great first impression turns into a long-term influence?
Well, first and foremost, be true to yourself. Know who you are as a person and stay true to that. In other words, I always say it on the company side, present the company throughout the interview as to how it really is. The term I used to use, I don't as much anymore, but it still holds true, what I call realistic job preview. Meaning throughout that interview, you're getting a feel for what it would be like to work there. Mm-hmm. Well, on the other side, you're giving them a feel for who you are to work with. So you let your personality come out a little bit. If you're the kind of person that likes to joke around a little bit and have fun with it and so on, be that person. Right. Because 2 things are going to happen. They're either going to like that, and that's going to be a positive influence over the hiring decision, or they're not going to like it. And quite frankly, that's not someplace you want to work anyways. If it's a place that's stodgy and they don't like joking or anything like that, and you make some jokes that, again, and jokes that are in good taste and good humor and so on, and they don't respond well to that, then guess what? You're not going to like working there.
Yeah, exactly.
So be true to yourself. Be who you are, again, professionally, not obnoxiously, which you shouldn't be anyways in any circumstance. Know who you are, be true to that, be consistent. Those are the things that carry on that positive first impression. And again, the worst thing you can do in an interview, and especially in any relationship, we all know this, be something that you're not. Because people see through it and it doesn't respond well. Go ahead.
And I think people do that. People probably exactly do that instead of being their true self.
Well, and that's why with a lot of our clients on the career coaching side, I start off the call, if it's a call or if it's a meeting, just having conversation and just talking. Right. I'll pick something up, whatever it may be. It's something that's in front of us. Maybe it's in their resume or something about the process, or just something for them that feels like a conversation. And then at a point in the coaching that I do, I'll stop and say, you may not realize this, but we've already been interviewing.
Right.
Because that's what an interview should be. They should be comfortable, be themselves. When we're those things, we're much more relaxed. When we're trying to be something that we think somebody wants us to be, or that we're supposed to be, or we should be, or whatever all these other things are, we're not relaxed. We're not going to present our best self. The company's not going to make the best informed decision, because they're going to be hiring a certain person and they're going to get something else. So it's a lose-lose all the way around. Mm-hmm.
I agree. Well, great conversation again today. This was a very interesting topic.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Becki, because we feel like I say this every week, but we choose the topics for this reason. This is another one that doesn't get a lot of attention. It becomes a point to where it's just accepted. And what's interesting too, and you and I have talked about this, in fact, we're going to do a video on this, is that so many people, especially if they've been in the professional world for a while, just think they're really good at first impressions, but they're not. They're absolutely not. I've met people that have been in the business world for 30 years, and they're some of the worst interviews I've ever had, because they get overconfident about their abilities. So I guess I would end us today to say, take a hard look at who you are and what you're about and how you present yourself, and seek feedback from those that you trust and those that would be a good informer of you and would be honest with you about the kind of impressions that you're giving. And then work on that. Continue to work on that. We all can, me included. And I know I usually give off a fantastically wonderful first impression, but even with me, I do focus on trying to get better with that and stay good at it and so on. And by the way, whoever's listening and thinking, oh, that guy's really arrogant, I'm kidding. I know it's something I need to work on, and I continue to focus on. Believe you me, I know it. So again, as you said, Becki, great discussion. I'm glad we can talk about these things. I love our dialogue between us. I hope we've made a great first impression, or a great impression on our listeners around this topic. So we're going to take a quick break here at the HRKyle Podcast, let you learn about a couple of things we're up to or that we can help you with. And then we'll be back with segment 2, where we're talking with our friend Glenn, who is an expert, as far as I'm concerned, about making a great, positive first impression. So we'll be right back. Greetings, I'm Kyle Smith, and I'm here to offer you a speaking experience that goes beyond the ordinary. With a rich background in leadership, HR, and personal development, I bring a unique blend of expertise and passion to every presentation. Whether it's Leadership Unleashed, well-being at work, or career mastery, I delve into topics that empower individuals and organizations to reach their fullest potential. What sets me apart? Proven expertise, an engaging delivery style, and actionable insights that drive positive change. But here's the kicker. I don't just offer a one-size-fits-all approach. I customize my content to meet the specific needs and goals of your event. So let's elevate your event together. Contact me now to reserve your date and unlock the full potential of your audience and organization. Don't miss out on the opportunity to inspire greatness. Visit HRKyle.com today. Are you a business owner looking to build a thriving team? or perhaps a job seeker on a quest for your dream career, look no further than HRKyle. HRKyle is your trusted partner for all things human resources. We're not just about services, we're about success. For businesses, HRKyle offers tailored HR solutions from talent acquisition to compliance support. We're here to help your team flourish. And for the job seekers, HRKyle provides personalized career guidance and direction that only a seasoned HR professional can offer. We'll help you find that perfect job match. Don't settle for less. Choose HRKyle and unlock success today. Visit us at www.hrkyle.com. HRKyle, unlocking potential, empowering careers, transforming business. Hello and welcome back to the HRKyle Podcast. In segment 2 of this episode, we're going to continue the discussion that we started in segment 1, talking about the power of positive impressions. And I've got a guest joining me tonight who has quite a bit of knowledge and expertise in this area. Now, he's been an executive in the technology segment for a number of years, but according to him, he's always been selling for his entire life. And boy, can I relate to that. And that's ultimately what he's still doing, whether it's for his own business or he's talking with others how to be effective at that. So if there was ever a person to come on here and speak from an expert perspective on making positive impressions, it's this man. And his name is Glenn Poulos. Glenn, welcome to the HRKyle Podcast.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
No, it's a pleasure having you. I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight, Glenn. So first question for you. I've given you an intro, but I know I didn't do you justice. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, let's see. I've had the privilege of working in sales, as you said in the intro, I can't believe it. I used to say, 30 years, but now in 2025, it'll actually be 40 years. And so, and I kind of egads myself at that point, and I have been selling my whole life, except for those 3 years. I was a federal, civil servant in the Canadian government, as an electronic technician until my boss pulled me aside and said I was in the wrong job and, kicked me out of the government and said, go get a job in sales. And that was 1985, and I've been selling ever since. And I've been in the tech sector that whole time, primarily in the wireless cellular space, the evolving cellular market, and now more into the cellular, wireless, and broadband. But so that's a bit about me. Also, I have 2 French bulldogs, Pierre and Jean-Jacques. I love hanging out with the dogs. Married, 5 kids, and live near Toronto, but we also live part-time in Florida. So we live both in Florida and in Canada.
Well, Glenn, my hunch is that Florida time is probably between the months of October and May?
Yeah. Funny how you get sun, eh?
Yeah, I just had a feeling about that. I don't know. But Toronto's a beautiful city, and I know you'd agree with that.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, Glenn, one of the things that you talk about, and it really resonated with me because I actually have talked about this concept too as a human resource professional. I've talked to my teams about this. But it comes back to this theme and this importance of being a pleasure to do business with. Can you share with this audience some key strategies that you think would help them maintain a positive client experience, really regardless of the role they hold?
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, being a pleasure to do business for me, that's where it starts and ends. And it's built upon, for me, the foundations of empathy and understanding the client at a deep level. And I mean, I challenge people to go and grab the dictionary and read the definition of empathy, sympathy, and compassion, and make sure you get the use of them right. And, but empathy is really putting yourself in the client's shoes and feeling what they're feeling, how they would feel it, right? And it's not wanting to alleviate their pain and suffering. It's not understanding how they feel, but it's literally feeling it, right? And so one of the strategies I push for that is active listening. And, it's really about hearing what the client is saying and not just waiting for your turn to speak, right? And when you're a salesman, especially when you're younger, but even now, I find myself, the client will say something and I want to just cut them off and, and say, oh my God, we do that really well. And, buy my product, right? And, but you have to, take a breath and, the old saying, God gave you two ears and one mouth, so you do the math. And, and additionally, consistency is the key. Every interaction with a client should be consistent in terms of the quality and the tone, whether you're winning or losing, right? And, sometimes you're going to win the deals. Sometimes you're going to lose the deals. But the key to being a pleasure is them wanting to call you back even when they can't award you the business that particular time, but to give you the next shot because it's such a pleasure to do business with, right? Strategy is to personalize the experience, knowing details about the client, but don't overuse them. Don't be over familiar with them. You have to earn that status with them, right? You don't invite them golfing on the first time you meet them, right? That kind of thing. So.
Well, Glenn, I love it. And everything you've said there, as you propose, even on your LinkedIn profile and the other work that you do, these are principles that are applicable to really any line of work and any segment of our lives. We're not just talking about sales. Obviously, that's been your bread and butter. But when you talk to groups, you're talking to groups of all different types and functions.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've had the pleasure of talking to quite a few buyers as well about the sales, like from a salesman's perspective, what does a buyer need to know, right? And how can a buyer be a better buyer when they're dealing with a salesman and, flipping the script, right? And also just, how to be a pleasure to be around at parties and at functions, at social functions, right? And, at dinner and, not how to be a pain in the ass at company dinners and not how to be a nuisance. And, I'm sure at some point you'll mention, or I'll mention it now, shameless plug about my book, Never Sit in the Lobby, right?
Yeah.
And several of the chapters in there are on etiquette and how to behave, right? So.
Glenn, I love it. And again, as I shared as we kicked off here, it resonates with me because it has a lot of applicability to the things I talk about from HR and talent attraction and so on. So there's a lot of key messages here. So a lot of what you're talking about too is just this lasting positive impression. And I'm reminded of the quote, and I know you've heard of it. You may not remember a person's name, but you'll remember how they made you feel. And I've got to believe that that's probably something that you've thought about and talked about before in your work. But with that in mind, what are some practical steps? So we've got listeners listening. They're saying, okay, I'm buying into what Glenn's saying. But what are some practical steps or habits that businesses can implement to ensure that they do consistently stay in front of their clients with this lasting positive impression that you're talking about?
Well, one practical step, I guess, would be to schedule and deploy regular check-ins, right? Not just when there's an issue, not just when there's a new sale on the horizon, but as a way to maintain and deepen the relationship. This can be as simple as monthly phone calls or quarterly review meetings. We call them QBRs, quarterly business reviews. Obviously you're going to use technology to your advantage. The CRM is going to give you reminders. It can help mix it up. It can help send them the newsletter, send them an email, schedule a call, and then, if you're using some of the advanced techniques inside of HubSpot or other kinds of email communication marketing programs, it'll tell you, hey, they opened the brochure, they sat on page 14 for 30 seconds, and you're not going to call them right up 5 minutes later. But I mean, you can when you see that, you can set a follow up for 3 days later, and you can just, casually drop about the areas that they were maybe focusing in on, right? And so the key is sort of consistency with variety, I find, right? Phone them. If you phone them, leave a voicemail. If you leave a voicemail, send an email, and just create these multiple touch points. And within those touch points, I'm always advising people to be as brief and succinct, right? And, for instance, don't have a long, blathering on about, oh, how are you? How was your weekend? Oh, thanks for asking how I am. Or most people are kind of tired of hearing from you before you've even got through that. I'm kind of like, it's Glenn from Acme Distributing. I'd like 15 seconds of your time to go over the way we've been improving people's throughput and production for the last, something like that, right? And just get right to the point and see if you can get on their calendar and save them time or do what it is you're trying to do. Yeah. So, those are some things. And what, you had asked, sort of about make a positive impression, right? One of the things I love to share, I want to make sure I get it out, is when you're going to meet clients, if you've met them before, I have this thing called never forget a face. So when you get to the customer location, or pull out your phone, pull out the contact, the CRM, and remember everyone's face that you've ever met in that building. If there's 4 or 5 people, 6 people that you've met, go to each one and remember their face, right? Because the worst impression you can make is when you forgot their name and you're walking past them and they say, "Oh, hey, Glenn, how's it going?" And you know the name, but you just can't grab it really fast, right? And that is the opposite of a positive impression, right? It's like, "Oh, that guy never remembers my name." And, but when you do remember their name, they're like, "Oh, he's such a pleasure to do business with. And he always remembers my name, even when it's been 2 years," right? So.
Awesome advice, Glenn, and things that, like I said, that people can take from this episode and put immediately into practice, again, regardless of the field or the area that they focus in. Folks, we're talking to Glenn Poulos. Glenn is an expert on this concept of making a positive impression on others, and he has made a very successful career of this, both in his professional life, but in helping others as well. So that's what we're talking about tonight. Glenn, what are some common challenges that you think businesses really face when trying to be a pleasure to do business with? And how do you advise them to overcome these?
I would say that probably the biggest, sort of challenge in maintaining the pleasure to do business with peace is when you find a misalignment between what the client expects and what the business delivers, right? And this can often stem from a lack of clear communication or understanding, the client's true needs, because you're kind of square peg round hole. You're kind of putting your sales desires ahead of the customer's true needs, right? And to overcome that, you have to set clear expectations from the start and regularly visit them with the customer to make sure that you're on point with it, right? And so, what is it they're trying to accomplish? And, and spend the necessary time, defining, at least half the time up front, defining what it is they need, and then, maybe another 20 to 30% of the time discussing that further. And then the last part would be presenting your solution, right? Not just jumping to, they've got a hole and I've got a, plug. So let me plug your hole, right? And you've really got to dive deep into it, The other challenge sometimes is wanting to meet your own short-term targets. And this can lead to you wanting to cut corners in service or discounting, and you have to really balance your pursuit of immediate goals with the long-term goal of the client, so that in the long run, they feel that you have their best efforts at hand, right? And, sometimes you're dealing with difficult clients and, that have unreasonable demands, or they might be hard to please. And the key I find is, patience, staying professional, and again, diving as deep as possible to find a win-win solution, right? And if you find at some point that you're not the right fit, then I have a saying, and again, I go over it in the book about lose quickly, right? And so there's no difference between being second and being last place, right? The only difference is that the second place guy spent almost as much time and money as the first place guy who won the order. And so if you realize you're not the right fit, graciously extract yourself at the most optimum moment so you can realign your sales time to the next customer who may be better fit for what you're doing. Right. And then you leave all the competitors fighting over that deal. You weren't going to win it. So, obviously you need to know you're not going to win. There's something fundamental, pricing, specs, something like that. But I always like to say, like, the moment you realize you're not the right fit, back away and stop competing. Don't fly them to the factory. Don't bring in the engineers. Don't, wine them and dine them thinking they'll sway them around. just graciously recuse yourself and then go find the next customer so that those competitors are tied up with that other customer fighting and you've got free reign on the next one, right?
Glenn, something that stands out to me too, as you're sharing your wisdom and your guidance and your direction, and my hunch is you kind of take it for granted because I'm guessing it's probably just part of who you are. But something that rings through to me as you're talking is a great deal of integrity in how you conduct yourself, how you represent your organization. Do you see that and do you feel that as well?
Absolutely. I mean, the, you know, I have a saying that I always say, you only get further to make another impression, right? And people are like, no, my mother taught me you have to make a good first impression. And I'm like, you're right. And your mom was right. But every impression is a first impression. And so you need to, you need to constantly maintain vigilance at at what you were like, right? And that's why I'm always harping about being a pleasure to do business with. And I mean, even my competitors that would lose to me would will often say to me like, "Oh my God, you're such a pleasure to lose to," or I'm so sorry that I had to win against you. You're so professional and it sticks. And these people end up remembering you for a lifetime, right? And these people move on, they move 2 or 3 jobs, and before you know, you're 20 years later and they're reaching out to you for some consistence because they remember you from before, right? And so yeah, I try to maintain a tight rein on my behavior and how I come across, and and that's the number one thing for me actually. So
Yeah, Glenn, we hadn't talked about it up to this point, but I can assure you it rings loud and clear throughout your message and what you're sharing. I mean, anyone that spends
nice.
a few minutes with you, that comes out. The other thing too that struck me that I really respect from people that have been sales roles with me is you described it a little bit different, but I'll describe it as we've reached a point to where clearly there's not a match. And that person graciously ends that discussion at that point. And again, you described it much more eloquently than I did, but that's something that I respect of that person. And I have to imagine too that even in those scenarios, that leaves the door partially open versus this constant pushing until the person finally has to say, Glenn, stop. I'm not going to do business with you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in a way, when you're losing and it's inevitable, like the number one opportunity is to lay the groundwork for them to actually feel bad and want to find a way to do business with you the next time, right? Like subconsciously, if you're treating them so well, then what happens is they're like, well, the next time I want to maybe we don't need to have such a tight contract with brand A. Maybe we can open up the things so that we can allow Glenn and brand B, to come in and better offer their solution, because they're such a pleasure to do business with, but we can't because of this, that, or the other thing, right? And so they look for ways to work with you, or they look for ways to refer you to other people that could use your services or products or what have you, right?
Well, folks, obviously this guy's a master at what he does. I wasn't kidding because I love that last response. Glenn, I'll put you on the spot with this last question. We've only got really 30 seconds here, but we're hearing a lot of talk in all of our fields, whether it's sales, marketing, HR, whatever it is, about technology and specifically artificial intelligence. But you and I both know that it still comes down to the people. So with this technology creeping in so much more, how are you going to keep these concepts in play of being approachable and pleasant to do business with?
So, strangely enough, I mean, virtually every answer that I provide, I'm communicating a lot with the executives in my company and other companies and what have you. Virtually everything I do, I ask AI, what are my options? And I ask AI to craft me multiple responses. And then I take those words and then I formulate them often with other AI tools in order to create a practical response that, conveys enthusiasm and confidence. But it's fully vetted. I'm not just cutting and pasting from ChatGPT, but I use AI for literally almost every conversation and sort of project that I work on now. It's vital. You need to learn these tools. If you're a Microsoft, you got to add Copilot. You got to learn how to use it. You want to be a pioneer And you'll find that, a lot of your people in your cohort are slow to use it, and it will give you a huge leg up. Right now, you can advance and leapfrog them significantly, because most of them they're just not tuned in enough to use the tool. And so it gives you a massive advantage over your competitors in your rank.
Well, thank you for that, Glenn. And folks, it's no secret as to why this man is so sought after when it relates to sales and sales concepts and working with groups to become better at what they do. I think it's come through loud and clear in this interview and this discussion. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the HRKyle Podcast.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you today.
Folks, thank you as well for joining us for yet another edition of the HRKyle Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, and certainly want to thank you again for tuning in. I want to leave you with this. Just stay focused, stay grounded, and please stay tuned. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of the HRKyle Podcast. We hope you found our discussion valuable and filled with insights that you can apply in your professional journey. Whether you're a business leader aiming to foster a thriving workplace or a job seeker looking to carve out your own path, remember that HRKyle is the compass that can guide you towards success. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share it with your network. We're committed to being your trusted source for HR wisdom, and we look forward to having you back with us for our next episode. Remember, in the world of HR and professional growth, there's always room for progress. Be sure to visit our website at HRKyle.com. That's HRKyle.com to learn more about how we can help you meet your business and professional goals. So until next time, this is HR Kyle signing off. Stay motivated, stay informed, and keep reaching for those career goals. Music provided by bensound.com. That's bensound.com.